Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to sit down and chat to amazing humans about their journeys with mental health. For this series, I'm talking about neurodiversity, and I'm very happy to introduce Andy Reddy to the conversation. Welcome, Andy.
Hiya.
Hiya, lovely to see you. So Andy, I'm going to throw it over to you. Let you tell us a bit of a story about your journey with neurodiversity and what that means to you. So over to you, sir.
So I'm going to talk about myself. I thought before we started, do I talk about my son who's autistic or myself who's dyslexic?
Yeah.
But actually, I thought this would be a great opportunity to talk about me, because I think often with dyslexia, you hear a lot of people saying, "Oh, I'm dyslexic. I've got a bit of dyslexia," or people don't think that it necessarily affects people that negatively. And so actually I want to sort of talk about my journey, because I think it's really important for people to hear. So I was lucky. I was diagnosed at age 4 or 5. So had the support, had really supportive parents. And I remember sort of at an early age actually being quite angry about, why is it that I've got to go and do all these extra English and maths lessons, and feeling quite frustrated about that, because I remember my brother would go and play sport, and on a Saturday I would have to get up and go around the corner and have these extra English lessons. And so I sort of thought, well, that would be life. You would have extra English lessons, and then you'd basically be all sorted.
Right.
And I think also what often people think with dyslexia is they think of just the reading and writing, and they don't actually look at the other impacts of it. And for a long time, I didn't really understand that. So I sort of I found school really difficult. I basically was a naughty child, and really, I think the teachers who knew and understood me were really supportive and really sort of helped. And the ones who didn't understand me, then I would be thrown out of lessons, and I'd get in trouble, and I'd have detentions. And it sort of left me as quite an angry sort of teenager, really. And I ended up doing GCSE maths GCSE English 7 times.
Wow.
So yeah, I kept failing it, and I kept failing it, and but I've always been quite resilient. I felt like I had to become resilient, otherwise almost my neurodiversity would get on the better of me. That's sort of how I felt. So I took it 7 times, and I sort of scraped through my GCSEs, and I got C's, and was it 6 C's and 1 B and 1 D. But then obviously did the English lots of times, and then it stepped up to A levels, and I just was not ready mentally, wasn't capable, ready, and I failed them in spectacular form. So I sort of ended up with 2 N's and an E first time round, and I just thought throughout school, because of always having to be in bottom sets and always having to do it, I left education feeling just stupid. I was like, oh, I'm not very intelligent, and that's how it made me feel. But I remember I failed these A levels, and I went up to my brother's university, and I was like, oh, and I had a really nice time, and I was like, oh. And I remember sitting there, and he was at Exeter University, which is a very nice university. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm sure I can do this if I really try.
Yeah.
I don't know. So then I ended up going back, and I decided that the one thing that I did to manage myself when I was younger was that I would play sport. So I've always been into sport, always played sport, played a variety of different sport. And so I realised in time that actually sport helped me manage myself and my own mental health throughout my life. So I basically was like, right, I want to do a sports science degree, because it's the one thing that I knew that I could escape. It was my escapism tool. I wouldn't have to read or write. I could go and do sport. I wouldn't be judged on anything else, and I would be able to be normal. Essentially, I'd fit in.
I know what you mean. Yeah.
So I could go and play, and most sports, I could play at a decent level and get in school teams and stuff like that. So I did a sports science degree, and again, didn't get help from university, and I don't necessarily blame the universities then. I just still think the world was very naive. Like now universities are doing so much more. I got sort of a computer at the time and I got some extra time, but actually what I needed was somebody to really work with me on understanding me and understanding how I was affected by my dyslexia.
Yeah.
So, you know, I think the thing I find frustrating with dyslexia is a lot of people say, oh, I'm dyslexic and things like that. But I know, for example, if I wrote a sentence and it had 7 words in it, I would probably, out of those 7 words, I'd probably spell 2 or 3 the wrong way round the first time. Then I'd have to restructure the sentence. So I know my dyslexia has affected me quite severely over my life. So then I sort of left university. I did university. I got a 2-2, but again was a bit disappointed with that because I was like, oh, I'm capable, and that still made me feel like I wasn't very bright. I wasn't very intelligent. And so I then sort of tried a variety of different jobs, and then I ended up in education. And I did that classic thing where my mum was saying, go and be a PE teacher. Like, it's got all the attributes. You don't have to do lots of reading and writing. And of course, I did the opposite, saying, no, I'm not going to do that, mum, like you do. And so I went into education, and I was really good in education. I was a really good teacher. I absolutely loved it, and the impact I could make for other people was brilliant. And then I sort of started getting to the point in education where I was getting promoted up, and so and then I sort of, my first real sort of taste of, oh, actually my dyslexia is now impacting me in work, was when I started to apply for jobs. So I started to apply for jobs, and then I would realise that sometimes I'd have spelling mistakes on bits, or some of my language wasn't. And with somebody with dyslexia, you really need to have somebody who's a champion who will look at your stuff and really understand you. And so for a while I didn't really have that. My mum would do it, but again, then you don't really want to rush your mum. And then I went through sort of a series of interviews where I really felt the discrimination, and I still feel the discrimination. And that, you know, I remember going to job interviews where I'd say that I'd have dyslexia, and I had to do PowerPoints, and not PowerPoints, to do a presentation, and I was asked to write. And I told them I've got dyslexia. I was picked up with spelling mistakes. I went to another interview where somebody, they had all the disability so that you to admit it, and the first thing they did was make me do a writing task. So I've had throughout my career had lots of times, and I have a like, by the way interviews are done, I have got sort of a little bit of a chip on my shoulder, which is another conversation. But I sort of ended up getting a job where I met my wife, who's amazing. And I was conscious of my CV, because I was like, okay, I've got, you know, I haven't got the CV like everyone else. It's sort of a scraped through CV. And even the option choices I've made in life have felt like, oh, I had to do sports science because I wasn't going to get the A-levels to do that. So I always felt like my dyslexia has almost sort of made me go in a certain path because of the qualifications I've ended up getting. The doors have been shut to me. So I've always felt like it's sort of quite a difficult path that I've run in that sense, because it's not necessarily managed by me. And what I didn't say at the start was that what I always really wanted to be was a doctor. But I learned from an early age that I just wasn't going to get through the exams, because there's not enough to support people with neurodiversity when it comes to that. So I met my wife, and then she really inspired me to end up doing further qualifications. And since then, so I've got 2 master's degrees, well, they're distinction level. And what that really showed to me was that actually, if I'm not under this false tight constraint, and I've got my own time and I can plan, that actually I'm a bright guy, but I need that time to really structure
Yeah.
and organize myself if I want to do that. So I ended up doing sort of my master's degrees, and that was sort of great. And then I sort of got into the stage where I was going into leadership positions in schools, and that's where then I really sort of felt that discrimination of there isn't really enough support out there. And that's also why I was like, I'd like to come and talk on this, because
Yeah.
I sort of got to the senior leader position, and the problem is in education there just isn't the money, which is nobody's fault. Well, it's the government thing,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
so schools themselves are trying to do what they can, but what that means with no money and no finances is that there just isn't support staff. And so I would get millions of emails through, and I would have lots of work put on me. And I remember having a conversation with my dad, who was a chartered surveyor, and he owned his own business when he worked. And he said, "Oh, why didn't you just get an admin person?" And I said, "That's fine. We'll just can't provide that."
Oh
He
yeah,
was like, "Oh,
great
I need to
idea.
get." So, and then it got to the point where I was working so hard that I would get to the holidays, and the reading and writing, because it's an impairment. And if you think that I'm saying a sentence, I have to recheck every sentence and rewrite it. A piece of work for you where you might do, I don't know, imagine if you write 300 words and you're typing for a blog or whatever,
Yeah.
that's going to probably take me double time.
Mm.
And then on top of that, if I'm then sending something out, I've got to be conscious that it's saying the right thing, because often I write stuff and it's not saying what actually I'm thinking in my head.
Right.
So I would end up spending lots of time just rechecking. And what that in effect does for somebody with dyslexia is it burns them out. And actually what you end up doing is you spending all your time on things which are the negative thing about you, which then impacts on your mental health. Does that make sense? So,
Yeah, definitely.
like I actually find the world now where all the time we're sending WhatsApps, and it's all the time it's writing.
Yeah.
Actually, or sometimes the phone, I'll just be like, I just can't contact with people. It's just too tiring.
Sure.
And so what ended up happening to me in education was that I just got to a point, and I remember sort of saying to my wife, "What am I going to do? Like, I can't see myself doing this for another 10, to the end of my career." And she's in education still now, as a senior leader, but she can manage it because she doesn't have the same sort of impairment. So I then had to make a decision, and it was like, what do I do? Like, I've spent all this time and I'm good in education, but I just can't cope in education. If I do, I'm just going to end up getting really mentally ill,
Yeah.
and I'm not going to be able to cope. And I actually went and sort of got support and things like that, but it came to a point where I didn't feel the world could support me right now in that sort of setting. And I'm sure there's lots of other people do it. So I then was like, right, I want to look at alternatives in education. So just see if it's mainstream education, that is, or if it's education as a whole. So I then ended up going and running a school in a mental hospital, so in a CAMS 4, which acute psychiatric hospital, which had 12 to 18-year-old adolescents coming in, which unfortunately have had severe mental health problems. And when I was in that setting, I sort of sat in that setting and thought, it's so awful what's happening to it. But is there anything that I can do before this point? Because I felt like being in that setting was almost, the hospitals could do what they could do, but actually, was there anything I could do before that point? And then that's where I was like, right, so I've got dyslexia. I've always really struggled with it. And what I haven't said is that I've got a son who's autistic, who again is something that we've managed as a family as well. And so I ended up doing my Senko qualification, which is Special Educational Needs Coordinator in Education, if people don't know.
Yeah.
So, and then got lots of training and did my master's in psychology.
Mm-hmm.
And I was sort of thinking, like, how can I really start to make an impact? How can I support? And to me, I'm really passionate about, I don't want people to have the same struggles to me. So when I look at Callum, again, he's autistic rather than dyslexia, but there's definitely crossovers in how we think. And so for me, it's like, what I want to make sure that his path has been a lot easier and a lot
Yeah.
supported to me. So that's why. So I then started looking into coaching and supporting neurodiverse people, and I think now, like, there's this movement of neurodiversity which has started in the 90s, and there's been a real push. And for me, the umbrella of neurodiversity is the first time ever that I feel like I can really talk about my dyslexia
Yeah.
without feeling judged, because the problem is the original pathology term of, you go to get a diagnosis, you go and get this straight away, is the terminology is around that there's something wrong with you. And who's to say there's anything wrong with everyone? Because for me, like, we've created this world, we've
Yeah.
created this world that we live in, and then you're saying, oh, people don't fit in, or people don't fit in jobs because of their neurodiversity. But actually, we're the only people who create this world. Actually,
Yeah.
for me, like, I know that I'm a really good strategic thinker.
Yep.
I know that I can really sort of see things sometimes that people can't see.
Yeah.
And if we weren't in this concept of this human world that we had created, we were out still in caveman time. Actually, I might be this great leader who is capturing these animals. But because I'm forced to live in a world where I have to read and write all the time, then that is obviously challenging. And so other people must have these challenges. And I think often with dyslexic people, you don't see this because they still can fit in to some extent into certain levels of jobs. But I still think there must be lots of people like me where they would have got to a stage where either they're burnt out or they can't cope, and then they're like, what do I do now with my life? And also that's why I feel like I've ended up in this sort of entrepreneur sort of life where I've created my own business. But part of it is like, I haven't had a choice. If I don't do that, then I could have carried on being unhappy for the rest of my life, and then that impacts my family. So that's sort of where. But I think the big thing is with any neurodiversity is to really start trying to concentrate on the positive traits that you have, what you're good at. So I realized one of the reasons why I was like, why coaching, was that actually in education I was always in pastoral, and I was in disadvantages and SEND, and then obviously working in sort of a mental hospital is also a very pastoral role. And so for me, it's always been about empathy and looking after other people and trying to support other people. And so I know that's my strength, and that's why I ended up doing what I do. And that's why also, for me, any opportunity to discuss things like this, I think is really important. And and for people to hear different people with different neurodiversity, to actually tell their story and their path.
Mate, on it, Andy, it's been incredible to hear sort of the journey you've been on, and the very high hurdles that you've had to jump over in many occasions, to get to where you are. And I'm really pleased to hear that you're in a place where you're now always taking all of that experience and that journey and saying, right, okay, so I need to support others who are experiencing those challenges, because no doubt there are lots and lots of people out there, thousands and hundreds of thousands probably, of people who just don't know really what's happening or how to get through the adversity that they're experiencing. And we live in a world that's built for neurotypical people, so and it's hard when you're not neurotypical that things are a lot more challenging. It's not always noticed and recognized.
I think for me, one of the hardest things that I deal with, because every time you read and write, imagine every time you read and write, there's a mistake.
Yeah.
It's that inner monologue of still, you're not good enough. Why
Yeah.
are you not? And even though you know, like I've got so much
Yeah.
experience on understanding mental health and also different neurodiversities, and even though I know that,
Yeah.
you still can't switch that off. You
No.
still can't, I still will have regular conversations, and my wife would be like, "Oh, you're so inspiring!
All right.
Like what you're doing, like how far you've come." But my inner monologue is, "Oh yeah, but I'm not doing good enough," or "I need to have more clients," or "I need to support
Yeah.
more people." And
Yeah.
so that's almost a challenge on that fight you have. And I don't want to use the word fight, but sometimes it feels like that.
Yeah, but I think it's where we're our own worst enemy at times, aren't we? Where
Yeah,
we get inside our own minds and start to challenge everything we're doing. And
yeah,
and I talk about imposter syndrome and things like that, where I think where I come from and where I am now, and actually I shouldn't feel that way, but I do, and nobody can change that feeling, and nobody can say it's okay, you're doing well, or which makes me
yeah,
feel better about myself in that. But yeah, it's fascinating, Andy. It really is, and I think you definitely, showing and telling people your journey helps to connect to you, because there's reasons why you love what you do. There's reasons why you're passionate about your coaching, and no doubt why when you speak with your wife, she feels inspired by what you're saying because of the genuine thing that's coming from inside that, you can't buy in a book, or read in a book or whatever it is, so it's been incredible, honestly. We are right at the end. I will give you the floor just for a moment in a second, just to give your final thoughts and comments if you want to share anything for the end of the recording. But just from me, just a huge thank you. But any final thoughts, Andy?
I think the big thing is in a work setting or in whatever setting, actually, like
Yep.
education, is that
Yep.
actually people really start to voice what they need.
Mm.
And that can be the biggest challenge in the world, because for
Yeah.
years I would never admit that I've got dyslexia,
No.
and then I would struggle through. But actually, more and more people are fighting for what they deserve, and that reasonable adjustment that all establishments legally have to make.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
until that happens, things in society won't really, people have to challenge and challenge, and then society will change
Yeah.
and support those needs. And I think there's a long way to go, but the more voices in the world challenging that, the better.
Yeah. There you go, and we'll finish on that. The more voices in the world challenging that, the better. And I'm fully supportive of that, because the only way we're going to learn about what's really going on for people is by having conversations and listening, letting them have a voice and giving us their perspective. So, Andy, your perspective has been so valuable. Thank you so much for sharing things I've learned, and I love these because I learn through these conversations as well. And I hope that anybody that is listening also learns something about the journey that you've been on. So brilliant stuff. I wish you all the best for the future. Good luck with everything that you're doing. And I know we're not too far away geographically, we're literally about 5 miles from each other, I think. So hopefully catch up with you very, very soon as well. Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care. Look after yourself.